I hope this question applies equally to both of you, because you're both attorneys, but is there a difference between what an AG's office can do using federal law as opposed to Rhode Island state law? And if you can make an example of one of the failings of the current AG office, you know, like the Rhode Island Resource Recovery, and there is talk about looking into the educational partnership, you know, the misappropriation of funds. So if you could talk about that.
Well, a very good example of something where you would have overlapping authority and where you would have different laws would be Medicaid fraud, where you basically have specifically where you have a federal program and the federal dollars are helping to fund a state program, and it has been used in a sharing, for example, on some of the very few prosecutions, which as I understand were developed in the U.S. Attorney's Office and delivered, dealing with corruption of the developer of Hillside Nursing Center in Providence, who also had St. Francis, the St. Francis facility, and he went off to the prison. And so you do have that type of example where you clearly have the joint authority. One of the common laments that you hear from the staff of the Attorney Generals, and in fact one of the more recent candidates who entered said, well, we don't have enough resources. We can barely get by with what we need, what we have right now dealing with the day-to-day prosecutions. But the data doesn't support that. In fact, the crime rate shows that the actual Rhode Island crime has gone down. Some areas it's gone up. DUIs, some levels of violence. But over the last 10 years, the total crime rate that has been prosecuted in the state has gone down, yet our resources are slightly higher in that office. There are resources available. There are resources particularly when you get into some of the areas of fraud, white-collar crime, public corruption. You do have other federal laws that the Attorney General could take advantage of, such as RICO, for example, Racketeering and Corrupt Practices Act, which may apply in some instances. Historically, they haven't done that, but yes, those are opportunities, and I think the staff is there.
Certainly there's enough staff to cover these kinds of issues at the Attorney General office. There's approximately 234 employees that work there. We've got approximately 126 attorneys. 98 of those roughly are criminal prosecutors. So when people say that there aren't enough resources at the AG's office, I say it's just a matter of they haven't set the right priorities. As for issues involving federal law, had the health care bill been as it was passed recently, and if it comes out looking in any way similar, I will use the power of the Attorney General to challenge that federal statute and join with other AGs around the country that were in fact putting together a challenge to that.
Just in addition to what you just said, so you would sign on to a nullification?
I would absolutely sign on to challenge the constitutionality of any sort of health care bill coming out of the House and Senate. This is a time when we need to stand up for what's right for our state. Currently, that health care bill, as it was written, would have passed on about $235 million back onto the state for us to fund when we're already facing a mounting budget deficit. So we can't allow that for Rhode Islanders. Another area that I would have taken a lead on is the issue of the fishing that was brought up earlier. We could have challenged that. We could have challenged how that was done. We could have challenged the feds on that, and quite frankly, we didn't. We could have also taken another recourse by not charging people to register to fish off our Rhode Island shoreline. In fact, believe it or not, Attorney General Cuomo, a Democrat, in fact, has taken up that fight. There are other Democrats that wanted to fight that. It's about protecting the sovereignty of our state, and we have, I think the Attorney General has an obligation to do that, and I'm not afraid to.
Next question, please.
Where did our volunteers go?
Hi, I'm Jeff from Central Falls. My question goes to both of you. Each year, we find that we have thousands and thousands of illegal immigrants in our state. How do you plan to fight this? And the second question is, what assurances can both of you guys give us that you will keep all of your campaign promises?
That's a fair question. It absolutely is a fair question. Let me start with the immigration issue. First of all, there's a bill in the Rhode Island Senate that's being considered that would prevent law enforcement from asking individuals whether or not they are here legally. That's preposterous. Absolutely preposterous. It's a legitimate law enforcement question, and I'll give an example of why. If I'm arrested and someone asks, and I go before a bail commissioner, or I'm brought before a judge on a charge, and that judge has to make a determination as to the kind of bail that I'm released on, that judge wants to know my ties to the community, wants to know how long I've lived here, wants to know if I have a job, do I own a home. If I tell him no to all of those things, if I tell the judge that I live in Connecticut, I may get a higher bail. If I tell the judge that I live in California, I'm going to get a higher bail because my ties to the community are less. And if I'm not from this country and I'm here illegally and undocumented, then that judge has a right to know that answer. So to suggest that law enforcement shouldn't be allowed to ask that question is outrageous. I believe we should be cooperating with ICE just like we do every other federal law enforcement. And as for keeping our campaign promises, I can tell you that I will keep mine. And the reason for this is that I don't need to be the Attorney General to know who I am as a person. I have a loving wife. I have 2 wonderful children. I would have been perfectly happy in private practice, but I felt a calling, just like I did to join the United States Air Force as a JAG, just as I did to come back and serve as a criminal prosecutor. So I'm not here because I need that to validate who I am as a human being. And I'm not going to stand up here and make promises that I'm not going to follow through on. And I promise you that I will work hard for the people of Rhode Island and that I will not let them down and that I will fight to make Rhode Island a safer and more prosperous place for all of its citizens, Democrats, independents, Republicans, moderates, all alike, because the office is not about politics. These are Rhode Island issues that we're dealing with in this office, and politics should be the furthest thing from the Attorney General's office.
And I guess I'll start out by just echoing what Eric said. One of the real issues about this office has been the intense politicization that has occurred over the past years. It's been a while, and I've heard this repeatedly from people who've come out and said, I'm fed up. I was a former prosecutor 10 years ago. The place is very different now. You're talking about, but I will say, as an Attorney General, I consider that there are 2 functions to the job. The function number 1 is to enforce the law that is given to you. To enforce the law that is given to you and to make sure you are coordinating your resources with all of the other relevant federal and other state and other local police departments and other law enforcement officials. That's also another problem we've had repeatedly over the last 8 years in particular, is a failure of coordination with the federal resources with our own state Attorney General. So the point is yes, coordination with ICE is critically part of the job. ICE is involved in law enforcement. I'm running to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, so I will work with ICE, I will work with all federal prosecutors, and I'll work with all state law enforcement agencies. As far as the laws that I enforce, they're going to be the laws that are given to me. If it's E-Verify or anything else of the nature, it will be enforced because it's the law. If I don't like the law, however, I'm not going to come up here and tell you tonight as a prosecutor, I'm not running as a legislator, I'm running as an enforcer of the law as it exists. And if I don't like the law, you'll see me up in the legislature, or you might see me contacting my members of the congressional delegation in an independent role saying, hey, I don't like that immigration law as it's being applied. It ought to be tighter, and this is why. But when I'm sitting there with my prosecutor hat, I follow the law. You ask me, how are you going to understand that I'm going to follow my promises? Well, I guess the answer is very simply this. The one thing about you learn if you're going to be successful as a lawyer practicing, as long as I am, is that your word is what your whole practice is built on. And I wouldn't have been practicing as long and been as successful as I have if I didn't have a word. If I can't give you the same word that I've been giving in the law practice that I've given for 30 years, I couldn't be running and I can't be a successful lawyer. That's been my record in the community, and that's the record I'm going to maintain.